Hello there! If you haven't seen the last couple episodes about the story of Amonkhet, I highly recommend watching those videos before this one. I'll be building off of things I explained in those videos, so it'll help you make more sense of things. With that being said though, let's begin, shall we? If you'll recall from last episode, the Gatewatch traveled to the plane of Amonkhet to find Nicol Bolas, the evil Elder Dragon Planeswalker. There, they found the paradise city of Noctimun, but at every turn, it became clearer and clearer that something sinister was going on. While all of Noctimun revered Bolas, whom they called the God Pharaoh, who supposedly created their plane and its gods, it became clear to the Gatewatch that Bolas had actually corrupted a pre-existing plane to suit his mysterious needs. The Gatewatch investigated and prepared as best they could before Bolas's prophesized return, and made new allies in the form of Samut and Jeru. But alas, their precious time had run out. Bolas was coming, and the hours had begun. But before we proceed with that present-day story, I'd like to take a step back for a moment. Some 60 years back, all the way back to the Mending. The Great Mending, which I talked about way back in my introductory magic lore video, was an event in which several temporal rifts were sealed on the plane of Dominaria. The sealing of these rifts stopped the multiverse from collapsing in on itself, but also had the side effect of reshaping the very nature of the multiverse, draining planeswalkers of the godlike power they once held. While many planeswalkers accepted this consequence of saving the multiverse, Nicol Bolas wasn't the type to take that sort of thing lying down. As the first rifts began to be sealed, and Bolas realized what was about to happen to the multiverse, he knew that he needed to act fast, to put in place a means to one day regain his godhood. With only days left before he lost his power, Bolas arrived on Amonkhet. Recognizing this strange dragon as a threat to Noctimun, the 8 gods of Amonkhet immediately went on the defensive. Oketra opened by firing arrows at Bolas, but he simply willed them to shatter mid-flight in an impressive display of reality-bending power. As Bolas began to reach out a claw to test the strength of the Heckma, the gods hurried to protect their people. Hazoret called for children and the elderly to move to the safety of the underground mausoleums, as Kefnet fought frantically to keep the Heckma from breaking apart. But with nothing but a simple glance, Bolas fractured Kefnet's mind, sending the god plummeting to the ground. Bolas then breached the Heckma, as the remaining 7 gods attacked the trespasser with a furious defiance. But nothing they could do seemed to make a difference. They couldn't land a single blow. Bolas landed on the tallest tower in the city, and, closing his eyes, began to channel a spell. When Bolas opened his eyes, every mortal on Amonkhet who was old enough to walk simply dissipated into nothingness. The gods all crumpled in agony, bearing the loss of countless souls, as the wails of thousands of now parentless infants rang out. Oketra and Hazoret recovered enough to try to flee to the safety of the mausoleums, but nothing could stop Nicol Bolas. With a wave of his claw, he wiped the minds of the immortals. The gods of Amonkhet were now his. The next step of Bolas's plan required Noctimun to be self-sufficient, to fulfill his needs even without his presence. He took several steps to ensure that this would be the case. First, he corrupted and manipulated the ley lines that made up the gods, erasing their memories and tying their very existence to his own. He also set 3 of the gods aside, sealing them away for later use. Second, he opened up the mausoleums under the city and let the bodies of the dead, risen by the curse of wandering, out into the light to serve as caretakers for the newly orphaned children. Third, he changed the written history of the plane. There existed a religious ceremony in Noctimun, consisting of trials of merit that resulted in 1 sacrificial champion every revolution of the second sun. Repurposed, what was once 1 champion every few decades could become a constant supply instead. Fourth, he built a great throne within the city, and just outside the Heckma, erected an enormous monument in the signature shape of his horns, positioned to one day frame the second sun. Finally, he made a promise to return, writing his own prophecies and mythos and planting them in the gods. So, as Nicol Bolas schemed away elsewhere in the multiverse, the second sun would continue on its track across the sky, until one day, it would settle in its place between his great horns, and the dragon would return to collect his hoard. Alright, back to the present day. As the second sun finally landed in the center of the horned monument, the entirety of Noctimon rushed to gather around the gate to the afterlife, the great barrier that stood on one end of the Luxor River. Initiates who completed the Trial of Zeal were carried on funeral barges through the gate by Anointed, but no one but the dead had ever seen what was on the other side. But during the first of the hours to come, the Hour of Revelation, it was said that the gate would open, and that all questions would be answered. Although he was still furious with Samut, Jeru now ran alongside her, with a desperate hope that he would still be able to prove his worth and pass through the gate to the paradise that laid beyond. Waiting with bated breath, the citizens watched as the gate began to slowly creep open, wider and wider, until they could see beyond. They had been promised paradise, but all that laid beyond the gate was empty sands and wastes, just like on every other side of the Hekma. There was a building, the necropolis, where the worthy dead were carried by the Anointed and laid to rest, but besides that, nothing. Above all the chaos and confusion, Samut shouted to Hazoret, asking if this was indeed paradise, but Hazoret stood silent. The chaos of the crowd hushed when suddenly a large winged figure flew through the gate, past them into the city, landing on an obelisk. While some cheered and hailed this figure as the God Pharaoh, Samut could immediately tell what it really was: a demon. This demon surveyed the gathered crowd before swooping down to the river. Hovering above the Luxor, it raked its claw across its forearm, allowing blood to flow from the wounds. The demon muttered an incantation, and then, with each drop of demonic blood that fell into the water below, the flow of the river slowed before halting entirely. The blood then began to spread, and up and down the Luxor, the water coalesced to a deep crimson. As the water turned, death followed, as all life within the river was smothered by blood. Then, its curse complete, the demon turned to address the bewildered crowd, but it only called a single name: Liliana. Razaketh had arrived, the final guardian before the afterlife. Liliana tried to stay hidden in the massive crowd, but Razaketh called for her to come to him, and even though her mind resisted, her body obeyed. She was forced to walk out of the crowd against her will and make her way to Razaketh on the opposite bank of the Luxor, nearly suffocating in the river of blood in the process. This demon clearly held a power over Liliana that neither other demon she had killed did. Razaketh was enjoying it too, as he simply toyed with her for his own amusement, making her bark like a dog and punch herself in the face. Liliana informed Razaketh of her intent to kill him, but he was unintimidated, and completely unimpressed when Liliana informed him that she had killed 2 of her demons already. After all, Razaketh had absolute control over her. Alone, she was powerless. But of course, this time, she wasn't alone. It was around then that the Gatewatch finally made their way over to Liliana, and Razaketh's control over her was shattered as he was hit dead on by a jet of flame from Chandra. Liliana tried to use the opportunity to use her magic to fight back against Razaketh, but the demon was quick to reassert his control. But once again, his concentration was broken, this time with an attack from Nissa. While withstanding this sudden unexpected assault, Razaketh found it increasingly difficult to maintain control over any more than a single part of Liliana, but he managed to get a bit creative with it, first willing Liliana's shoulder to dislocate so she couldn't use her magic, and then forcing her legs to give out from under her, and ultimately focusing control on her diaphragm, stilling it and preventing Liliana from breathing. Liliana sent out a desperate mental call to Jace for help, and in response, Jace lowered an invisibility spell that he had been casting on Gideon, and Gideon was able to land a deep blow on the demon's backside, breaking his control yet again. Jace then proceeded to focus everything he had on protecting Liliana from Razaketh's control. Finally, Liliana had the chance to do what she had come to Amonkhet to do. She was going to use the Chain Veil to finish the demon off, but, heeding Jace's warnings against it, she opted for a different approach. Using her necromancy, Liliana assumed control of all the corpses of the animals that had lived in the Luxor River, a menagerie that had been smothered by Razaketh's blood curse. Moving them as she would her own body, she sent the mass of writhing bodies flying out of the river directly at Razaketh. The demon tried to escape, but was brought back down to earth with a blast of necromantic energy from Liliana, and she unleashed her horde upon him. The animals tore at Razaketh's flesh with teeth, horns, and claws as he howled in agony. To finish the job once and for all, Liliana willed dozens of zombie crocodiles to drag Rosageth into the Luxa and devour him so thoroughly that there would be nothing left for the Curse of Wandering to reanimate. Although Liliana delighted in the entire process, she finally let go after some prodding from Jace. 3 demons down, 1 to go. The rest of the Gatewatch was still thoroughly upset about Liliana lying to them about her reasoning for wanting to come to Amonkhet, but they kinda had more pressing issues. The Gatewatch headed deeper into the city to try to figure out their next steps. So, the Hour of Revelation had come and gone. Next up was the Hour of Glory, when it was said that the untested, and the gods themselves, would get the chance to prove themselves worthy before the God Pharaoh. After Rosageth was killed, the still blood of the Luxa began flowing backwards, up towards the necropolis in the distance beyond the gate. As the Luxa dried up, the blood seemed to seep into the stone of the necropolis. There was a flash of light, and all of a sudden, 3 massive figures, larger than even Noctimon's gods, emerged from the sarcophagi-like structures that were built into the necropolis's walls. Each of these beings was bizarre and alien-looking. They were clearly gods, but they barely resembled the gods of Noctimon at all. Although humanoid, each of these new gods was vaguely skeletal and bore an insect where its head should have been. The first god was a scorpion. The second took the form of a locust, and the third, a scarab beetle. The gods of Noctimon were unsure how to respond to these newcomers, uncertain whether they were foes, or perhaps a test. While the locust and scarab gods stood still near the necropolis, the scorpion god approached, and lumbered through the gate to the afterlife. Ronus called out to greet this potential threat, and commanded it to halt, but the creature continued its approach, responding with nothing but a low chittering noise. Figuring this to indeed be his own trial, Ronus stood his ground, when all of a sudden, the scorpion god charged. Ronus was prepared, and evaded the attack, engaging this new god in combat, but it soon became clear to him that he was outmatched. He was the god of strength, but this foe was somehow even stronger than him. Ronus managed to push his opponent away from him, and used the opportunity to cast a powerful spell that sent the scorpion god flying backwards with a single blow. Although the spell had never failed to end a fight before, it wasn't enough this time, and the immortal got back on its feet and returned to the fight, this time circling slowly around Ronus instead of charging. After casting a spell to envenom his staff, Ronus made the first move this time, striking the scorpion god with many quick blows. With each hit, the venom caused the god to slow, until finally Ronus was able to land a strike that cracked its carapace at the shoulder, allowing the magical venom to seep inside the god's body. Finally, the scorpion god fell to the ground, chittering weakly. Ronus then turned to address his onlookers in victory, but the words never made it past his throat, as he suddenly found himself grappled from behind by the scorpion god, its stinger piercing his skull. As Ronus died, he found his memories flooding back to him, and he remembered all that Nicol had made him forget. He remembered that these new gods were once his siblings, but now they were completely corrupted, their very names utterly erased. As the scorpion god advanced on the remaining 4 gods, leaving Ronus crumpled on the ground, Ronus poured the last of his strength into his staff, and, cursing the trespassing god pharaoh, sent it hurtling at the scorpion god, ensnaring it. With that, the light faded from Ronus's eyes, and the immortal god of strength died. In the Hour of Glory, the scorpion god had killed the strongest of the gods, proving him unworthy, and by extension, proving every other god and mortal of Noctimon unworthy. The remaining gods had no time to mourn their brother, as from beyond the gate, the second of the insect gods began to advance. The locust god spread its arms and unleashed a swarm of locusts from its hands, which proceeded to fly to the Hekma and begin eating away at the mystical barrier. The Hour of Promise had begun. It was said that during this hour, the Hekma would be torn down, for its protection would no longer be needed. But of course, why would they need the Hekma to protect them, if these new gods intended to destroy them anyway? As the Hekma began to dissolve, the city erupted into unparalleled chaos, as thousands of zombies from out in the wastes began pouring into the city. Kefnet attempted to repair the Hekma, but his efforts were in vain, as the locust swarm was seemingly endless. While most citizens ran, hid, and did whatever they could to survive, some mustered their strength and fought back. Hepatra, Ronus' eldest vizier, rallied the forces of the city to defend against the insectoid intruders and the forces of the desert. Riding on the back of her basilisk, Tuya, Hepatra came across Samut and Jeru. All three agreed that protecting Noctimun's people and its remaining gods was paramount, and they should work together to achieve that goal. The trio quickly found Oketra and Kefnet back near the gate to the afterlife, engaged in combat with the Scorpion God. Although the mortals urged the gods to flee and get to safety, the gods insisted that they had to protect their people. The mortals had to simply watch as Oketra's arrows bounced harmlessly off the Scorpion God's carapace, and Kefnet's illusions failed to make it falter. But still, the two gods fought in a beautiful tandem, and Kefnet managed to lead the Scorpion God in such a way that Oketra managed to land a perfect headshot, obliterating the Scorpion God's head, causing the rest of its body to crumble to dust. But just as the mortals began to celebrate, the dust of the Scorpion God began to shift, reforming into the very beast Oketra had just slain. Kefnet didn't even have a chance to react before the Scorpion God's stinger lodged itself in his forehead. The God of Knowledge was dead before he hit the ground. Oketra called for the mortals to flee, but Hepatra was determined to protect their god. Commanding Samut and Jeru to dismount Tuya, Hepatra had her basilisk charge the Scorpion God. But as Hepatra and Tuya tried to engage, Oketra leapt between them and the Scorpion God, protecting them from an incoming strike. The God of Solidarity was killed by a stinger to her stomach. With 3 gods eliminated, the Scorpion God then made its way deeper into the city, ignoring the mortals, intent on finding its other prey. As it left, several citizens of Noctimun emerged from hiding places to view the bodies of their gods. Among them, Gideon, who had arrived just in time to watch his god fall. Hepatra demanded to know if the God Pharaoh was a trespasser from another world, like she had realized Gideon and the other Gatewatch members were. When Gideon confirmed this, Hepatra told him that that meant that killing the God Pharaoh would be their responsibility. Meanwhile, she, Samut, and Jeru would try to find and protect Hazoret and Bontu, as they were all Noctimun had left. Samut and Jeru found Hazoret fairly quickly, as the god fought furiously to defend Noctimun's people from the encroaching horrors of the desert. She didn't want protection, however, and instead asked Samut and Jeru to round up as many people as they could and hide out in the desert until the God Pharaoh came and fixed things. Even then, Hazoret still believed in the God Pharaoh, and she prayed for his expedient arrival. Her prayers were quickly answered too, as it was then that a void-like portal tore its way into the sky, and out came Nikobolos, the God Pharaoh, returned to Amonkhet at last. He surveyed the destruction around him, and smiled. The citizens of Noctimun cried out in relief, but cheers turned once more to screams as the Elder Dragon raised a claw and summoned a torrent of black flames from the sky. Hazoret was finally faced with proof that her God Pharaoh was a lie, as she watched him perpetuate her city's destruction, rather than halt it. As Hazoret's mind raced, a voice resounded from nearby, hailing the God Pharaoh and pledging allegiance to him. The voice belonged to Bontu. As it turned out, Bontu was the only god who hadn't been corrupted by Bolos. Craving the power that she knew he could give her, Bontu didn't need to be corrupted. She served willingly, and she had been the one ensuring over the years that dissenters were cast out and that Bolos' alterations to the other gods didn't come undone. And now that Bolos had returned, he issued his servant a final order: kill Hazoret. Without hesitation, Bontu attacked, sending a blast of dark energy at her sister. The spell ate away at Hazoret's mind, slowing her down as she tried to fight back. But the spell didn't just eat at her mind, it also ate at the blocks on her memories, allowing Hazoret to remember everything. Crushed by the full realization of Bolos' deceit and Bontu's betrayal, Hazoret was overcome by her sister, although she still managed to weaken Bontu tremendously. Bontu managed to trap Hazoret in hardened tar, and she dropped her sister's dying form at Bolos' feet. In response, Bolos simply proclaimed that Bontu's usefulness to him had ended, and he blasted her with a bolt of dark energy. As the dragon strode away, leaving the 2 dying immortals behind him, Bontu let out a yell, enraged. She crawled towards him, slowly breaking into a charge as Bolas watched in amusement. But as the god approached, a monument collapsed in her path, and as she stumbled, she was swarmed by a horde of undead. What would normally be nothing to the immortal was enough to bring her down in her weakened state, and she was quickly overcome. Bolas laughed and flew away, towards the awaiting scarab god, but, refusing to give up just yet, Bontu released a wave of energy that killed everything around her, and, with a final look at Hazoret, she melted her tar spell away, freeing her sister. With that final act of defiance, Bolas' spell finally got the best of her, and the god of ambition died, leaving Hazoret alone, the final protector of Amonkhet. Anyway, as Bolas reached the Scarab God, the surviving denizens of Noctimun were left to face the Hour of Eternity, during which it was said that the worthy would take their place by the god Pharaoh's side, to live eternally. It turns out that was much more literal than anyone expected. As the Scarab God strode forth towards Noctimun, it was followed by the Eternals, an army of the worthy dead, risen by the curse of wandering, and all coated with a glimmering blue mineral called Lazotep. Unique to the plane of Amonkhet, Lazotep interacted with necromancy in special ways, enhancing a zombie's strength and rendering it nigh indestructible. It also helped preserve the skills that the dead had in life, leaving Bolas with an army of specially trained, indestructible, elite zombie warriors. And each fallen denizen of Noctimun could be added to their ranks once coated in Lazotep. One more Eternal to add to the endless army. The Eternals were coming for blood, and thousands would fall in their wake. So, saving the gods didn't work, and the god pharaoh wasn't here to save the day. Samut saw only one option: take Hazoret's advice and flee. Flee into the desert, away from the chaos and destruction. They would defy Bolas, the great trespasser, by living to see another day. They decided Hapatra would be the one to lead the band of survivors away, while Samut, Jeru, and several other determined warriors would head back into the city, fully willing to give their lives to try to protect their last god. Fighting through waves of Eternals, Samut and Jeru realized just how unstoppable this undead army really was. The two of them were almost killed by a single Eternal, whom they recognized to be Neheb, one of the strongest champions of Amonkhet's past. Luckily, the Gatewatch intervened just in time to save them, and, with their support, Samut managed to bring the undead Minotaur down. Since it was almost certain that Bolas already knew they were here, the Gatewatch decided that it was time to bring the fight directly to him. Samut wanted to go with them, to kill the one who had destroyed her home, but Jeru stopped her, and reminded her that they had a duty to focus on, protecting Noctimun's people, and finding Hazoret. Picking up a few survivors here and there, Samut and Jeru's band of warriors searched for Hazoret. This search led them to the body of Ronus, the sight of which incited a new fury in Samut. She climbed on top of the God of Strength's corpse and rallied her fellow survivors, hardening their resolve. It was then that Hazoret found them. She didn't come alone, however, as the Scorpion God was right behind her. Hazoret was badly injured, fighting with only one functional arm. But even then, she still commanded the mortals to leave her and flee, as she cast a fiery spell at the Scorpion God, trapping it in a vortex of flame. But even that was not enough, as the being's carapace cooled to a charred black, and it charged Hazoret, forcing her to block its stinger with her bad arm. But luckily, as the venom began to consume her flesh, Hazoret managed to slice her arm off, cutting off the venom's path. As the Scorpion God continued its approach on the now one-armed god, an enraged Samut used her magic to leap through the air and dig her blades into the Scorpion God, whose impenetrable shell was apparently softened by Hazoret's earlier attack. As Samut slashed at the god, the other mortals joined in, battering the being with blades and spells. At Jeru's order, they started pushing the Scorpion God towards a cluster of broken obelisks near the Luxa. Although the god was able to kill many of them, it couldn't take them all out, and at last it was pushed back by a mighty blow from a Kenra wielding Ronus' own staff. Jeru and some others were waiting behind the god with rope, causing it to trip, and a flying kick from Samut adjusted the god's trajectory, sending it straight into a half-toppled obelisk, impaling it. The Scorpion God squirmed and struggled to free itself, but Hazoret used the opportunity to embed her spear in the god's carapace, burning it from the inside out, rending it to nothingness. With that, the Scorpion God was dead, and it did not reform. Hazoret was grateful to the mortals, but especially to Samut, for trying to get her to see the truth, and the god thanked her for all she had done. Overwhelmed by joy from this praise, tears flowed down Samut's cheeks as something within her sparked. All at once, she was no longer on Amonkhet. She opened her eyes to find herself on Theros, another world of gods. Samut was a planeswalker, but she was still needed on Amonkhet for the time being. Calling on instinct, she managed to planeswalk back to Hazoret and the other survivors. And so, with the Scorpion God defeated, the group retreated into the desert to rejoin Hapatra and the others, leaving Nikobolos to the Gatewatch. They left Noctimun behind, led by Hazoret the God Survivor, not knowing if they could ever return. So, with the city destroyed, and the vast majority of its denizens and 4 of its gods killed, the time for the confrontation between the Gatewatch and Bolas had finally come. But Nikobolos knew they didn't stand a chance. After all, out of every possible course of action, they had chosen kill the dragon as their grand plan. How quaint. He looked forward to crushing them. This would be their unforetold Hour of Devastation. As Bolas landed in a plaza where the Gatewatch stood, Gideon was certain that throwing all their might at the dragon would be enough to take him down. As Gideon charged, and Chandra, Nissa, and Liliana began casting spells to go on the offensive, Jace tried to attack Bolas's mind. But Bolas was a much more powerful telepath than Jace would ever be, and it was a futile endeavor. All around Jace, his friends weren't doing much better, as Bolas toyed with the members of the Gatewatch, treating them like playthings. Literally even, as he bounced an indestructible Gideon at a wall over and over again like a rubber ball. He trampled Liliana's zombies, ignored Chandra's fire, and broke through Nissa's vines. Smiling, Bolas decided to lower his shields and let Jace into his mind, but it was a mind that Jace could not comprehend. It was a trap, which let Bolas grab onto Jace's mind and squeeze, destroying it from the inside. In a desperate bid to escape, his mind began acting on its own, and without conscious thought, Jace planeswalked away. Liliana knew that they couldn't win this. In fact, she would have already left if she didn't fear losing the Gatewatch's support. After all, she and the rest of the Gatewatch already had a bit of a rocky relationship, and her stunt with Rosaketh just made things that much worse. But Liliana knew that she wouldn't be able to defeat her last demon without their help. After Jace planeswalked away, Liliana prepared to use the Chain Veil against Bolas, as the spirits inside the veil screamed at her to unleash their full power. But Bolas made Liliana an offer. He told her that he could teach her how to use the Chain Veil without the severe drawbacks she usually suffered. He told her to leave, to go someplace safe, and that he would have use for her later. Defeated, Liliana urged Nissa, Chandra, and Gideon to do the same, and leave. They had lost. That was it. But it didn't seem like they were budging. Deep down, Liliana didn't want to listen to Bolas and betray her friends, but she didn't see another way out of this. As her tears began to fall, Liliana planeswalked away. Chandra was furious. At Liliana, at the plan failing, at all the horror she had seen today. But most of all, at Bolas. She unleashed wave after wave of inferno at the dragon, but Bolas simply chided her. Fire against a dragon. Come on now. Nissa tried to defend Chandra as Bolas dove at her, launching a boulder at the incoming dragon, but he simply redirected it back at Chandra with a flick of his tail. He then proceeded to pick up the injured Chandra in his claws. Nissa screamed at Chandra to flee. And now, battered and bruised, Chandra finally got the message. If she stayed, she would die. And so, Chandra planeswalked away. Nissa was relieved. She couldn't hope to save herself and Gideon with a grievously injured Chandra to worry about. But for the first time, Nissa questioned the Gatewatch. Their motives, their goals. They had come in underprepared and underpowered. That had worked against Olamog and Kozilek. It had worked against Emrakul. It had worked against Hazoret, but against the dragon with the power and intellect of Bolas, they just didn't stand a chance. As Nissa tried to resume control of the land around her, she realized the truth. This land had submitted to Bolas long ago, and it would fight only for its master. As Bolas began to smother Nissa with dark, corrupted tendrils, he was knocked off balance by a tackle from Gideon. Using this moment of opportunity, Nissa planeswalked away. Gideon had only felt this hopeless once before. Long ago, when he sparked after inadvertently getting his friends killed, and he had vowed never to let anything like that happen again. Gideon told Bolas that, in the end, he wouldn't win. But the dragon knew better. Gideon saw himself as invulnerable, invincible, but that was foolish. With a single talon, Bolas broke through Gideon's magical shield, piercing armor and flesh alike. He could easily kill Gideon, but he figured Gideon wouldn't mind that, considering how reckless Gideon was with his own life and the lives of others. Bolas gave him a choice: stay and die, or leave and live. Part of Gideon wanted to stay, to submit. He was tired of all the death, all the people he couldn't save. His friends on Theros, the people of Zendikar and Innistrad, the people of Amonkhet, the Gatewatch. He was truly powerless, but he would not give up. He would live to fight another day, and so, Gideon planeswalked away. Bolas was left alone, satisfied. It was then that Hazoret showed up, apparently late to the party. He was puzzled by the lack of Gatewatch corpses, but Bolas told him not to worry about it, and instead to go check on another pawn of his, Ral Zarek, on the plain of Ravnica. Hazoret left to fulfill his orders, leaving Bolas alone once more. Now Nicol Bolas had the planar bridge, and his army was ready. Only a few more pieces needed to fall in place before his plans could be properly enacted. In the dead of the first true night Amonkhet had seen in years, Bolas roared in triumph. He was finally making moves in the open, and his plan was progressing perfectly. For this moment, Bolas was content. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. I know 30 minutes is a lot, but thank you for sticking it out. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and let me know what you thought in the comments down below. I'd really appreciate it. I swear, I really tried to condense this video down, but there was so much info I wanted to include while keeping the drama level that was appropriate for this darker story. Let me know if you thought it worked, if it didn't, or what I can do better, etc. No matter what though, I can guarantee the next video will be much shorter and be ready in a much shorter time frame. Until then, thanks again for watching, and see you next time.